Hello, I am Dr. Cynthia Cook, the Director of the Defense Industrial Initiatives Group here at CSIS, with the latest in a series of roundtables on innovation in defense acquisition. I'm delighted to kick off this roundtable on meeting DoD's Innovation Challenge. We're going to talk about how DoD can adapt and scale cutting-edge technology across the services to maintain a focus on modernization. I'm joined today by three experts with diverse backgrounds and roles across DoD. First, on my left, we have Liz Young McNally, who is the Deputy Director of Commercial Operations at the Defense Innovation Unit, or DIU. Her background includes serving as co-CEO of Schmidt Futures and as a partner at McKinsey & Company. Liz began her career as a military police officer in the United States Army and spent 2 one-year tours in Iraq, where she served on the senior staff of General David Petraeus as his speechwriter. A graduate of West Point and Oxford, Liz is a Rhodes and Truman Scholar. On her left is Louis Koplin, who is the Program Executive Officer for Digital and Enterprise Services in the Navy, or PEO Digital. He leads Navy and Marine Corps efforts to secure decisive innovation advantage. Louis spent his career as a government civilian, including as the Deputy Chief Technology Officer for the Navy's CIO, in OpNav N4, and at NavSup up in Philadelphia. Lou studied at Penn State and has a graduate degree in business from Syracuse University. Finally, on his left, we have Justin Fanelli, who is the Acting Chief Technology Officer for the Department of the Navy and the Technical Director of PEO Digital. In both roles, he works to connect with industry to enhance the speed of innovation. Justin has previously served as a Chief Data Architect for Defense Health, and he teaches at Georgetown and has a bachelor's from Penn State and a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania, my own alma mater. All right, so welcome, the three of you. I'm so glad you could make the time to come to CSIS this afternoon for this roundtable. I'm going to offer each of you a couple of minutes, don't take too long, please, because we want to get to the questions, to just give you some kickoff remarks and help set the stage for the discussion today. After that, I have some questions, and we'll also open up questions to the audience. There is a place on the webpage where you can ask questions, so we welcome a robust discussion. So who wants to start?
I'll kick off.
Sure.
So really happy to be here with our partners because I think this is, as we've all noticed, an imperative time. There are times of hurry up and wait in military, and there are times where you really need to surge. This is a time of scale, and what we have seen in most fields is overnight successes are often many years in the making. And so the good news here is that we have been doing the making and working these partnerships harder than ever so that we do have more successes coming out on the other side, and we think that we're ready to scale more solutions and these frameworks and processes so that we can have usher in an era of public-private partnerships with more players on the field, getting more outcomes to our warfighters.
Okay, that's a good overview. Next up?
Yeah. Also thrilled to be here. Like Justin said, we say scale is earned, so we don't leap right to good. We have to learn a little, learn a lot, learn much more, and do a lot of experimentation in order to figure out what's really going to work. And that's why it's so exciting to be with this group here, which talk about digital transformation is a people problem rather than a technology problem. So it's all about that cultural renovation and having fellow travelers on that road to understand we've got the tools, we've got the ability, we've got the means. We just need to decide to get after it in the right ways so that we can fail fast and then succeed big.
Thank you. Liz?
Thanks so much, Cynthia, to you and CSIS for having us and for everyone for tuning in for as what Justin and Louis said is such an important conversation. I joined DIU about 9 months ago, back from the private sector for another tour of duty, and as both of them said, this is just such a critical time, which was part of the reason I answered the call to serve as well. at DIU, we're really focused in great partnership with folks like the ones I'm sitting at the table with on bringing commercial technology and dual use technology into the department. We made a lot of progress in 2024, and we're really just laser focused on continuing to build the momentum and do even more in 2025, and excited to talk about it today.
It's interesting. I've been in this ecosystem for a couple of decades by now. I don't want to say exactly how many. And there's always a push for innovation. But over the last few years, maybe the last 8 or so years, I've really seen a transformation and work to bring in venture investors and really to engage. And I don't know if this is driven by new opportunities or new technologies, but hopefully that's some of what we can unpack today. Let's start with a first question on one of the really tough jobs that the Department of Defense faces, which is balancing security risks and funding concerns as they decide where to invest. And really, if you look back at time, it's clear that hindsight tells you what the best investment was, and we don't have that luxury. We need to invest now. So how does each of your organizations balance risks and decide what technologies to invest in?
Prioritization is the number one lever that we have, but industry is traditionally better at prioritization than the government. It's hard to do in the government because we have so many different requirements. And so actually deciding to do one thing in favor of another is something that bureaucracies aren't always set up to do. And so what we've done is we've tried to be ruthless in our prioritization and focus that on outcomes. And so the way that we do baselining is we assess what capabilities our warfighters have right now. We've gotten a lot closer to them based on working with partners like DIU and having folks in the field with our operators observing, not just taking a requirements document and reading it. And that proximity has allowed us to also better inform our benchmarking of our adversaries. And so with those three, we are signaling clearer to industry and then allowing them and us together to validate what makes the biggest impact. So the answer is we are prioritizing based on transparency on our trade-offs and a better sense of what's available to us. So a really quick example on that is from a comms perspective, afloat, we have not had the communications, the connectivity, like we've always measured it in megabytes in my 20 years, right? The idea of bringing proliferated low Earth orbit would have taken a really long time, save a few people who were innovation adopters who said, hey, industry is doing this faster than we could ever imagine. Let's pull that forward. So you mentioned the private capital going in. We are trying to unleash that with a funnel. So instead of making this a valley of death, we're saying, let's do pulling from the PEO side so that we can get that capability in warfighters' hands much sooner. And it's not linear improvement. These are exponential improvements in days and months instead of years.
Yeah, it's always requirements pull, and that can be hard for industry to understand, especially new entrants, that they may have a terrific capability, but they really have to connect it with a customer, with a use, an operational use. Liz or Louis, either of you have?
Yeah, so some of what Justin said I want to hone in on, because one of the advantages that industry has is that they can monetize. You can take everything, you can compete against a discount rate. Well, if you just park that venture capital in bonds. So that unit of measurement is one of our challenges. And each of those requirement communities, of course, have a different unit of measure. And sometimes it's a little out of date. Sometimes it's not particularly well articulated. So we ask people to go fast, but to be safe, to try something, get off on your journey immediately. But measure your velocity based on arrival, not departure. If you want to cross the street, don't step in front of a speeding truck. Look both ways first. And the customer defines that arrival point, and they define those terms of value. So getting them to come in, and perhaps it's not just a linear improvement, perhaps it's not a linear analysis of the requirements, perhaps it's a conversation, a handshake. Because at the end of the day, when you get the 3 and 4 stars around the table, that tends to be the way things ultimately get decided, as opposed to 2 years and an 800-page analysis.
And I think that's a good insight. But one of the questions is that raises is communicating those requirements with industry.
Yes.
So Liz, I think that's a perfect seg for what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, I think we'll get to as we talk about the investment horizons, and all of us have different parts of the broad chain or categories as we think about the massive process, which is bringing new capabilities into the department. And DIU is really focused on, with speed and scale, where are we helping to think about those more urgent needs and capabilities that we're going to be able to bring in and prototype. And I think, we sort of have like a two-phased approach with how we're doing that. I mean, at a broad level, on a yearly basis, we refresh this again when our director joined about a year and a half ago, and we're going through this, is to really think about across our 7 different technology portfolios, what are the priorities? And we're doing that from a combination of understanding where commercial technology is going. So we're constantly out there, understanding that, and then combining that with, a real articulation from the combatant commands and the warfighters of what their urgent needs are, and then also in collaboration with the services, where their planning is going. And then we're constantly sensing and updating that throughout the year. And we're trying to continue to get better as well at demand signaling and sharing that signaling with industry, because they're taking, venture capital, you mentioned that, all of the new energy coming in, they're taking financial risk as well as part of this. So we're also constantly trying to help, articulate some of that in terms of where the demand is going as they continue to make their decisions too.
Yeah, we heard from industry on a project we did for the Office of Strategic Capital that there is money out there. It's the challenge for the venture community is knowing where to place their bets. And that's how communication with government helps.
Well, on that, just signaling was always important. It feels like it's been more important in the last couple years, and we've gotten a lot clearer in doing that. Specifically with this much money on the table, right, with 9 figures or more on the table of outside private capital who want to help this, we can now, through simplified processes, language, and just transmitting and receiving, funnel that towards our problems in a way that it was a partnership before. Now it can be jet fueled.
So why is signaling more important now? Is it the change in technologies that allow new entrants? Is it the growth of capital availability? What's your thoughts on the ecosystem and how things have changed and how you work with businesses?
Yeah. So in the Department of the Navy Acquisition Committee, we have a course that we encourage all of our management and leadership to go to called Understanding Industry.
Okay.
And so it's literally about those difference in perspectives, and I think that's one of the shifts. The technology's the driver, the threat situation's the driver, but also this cultural change within the government, I think. For a long time, there was this belief that saying what you cared about in a negotiation, formal or informal, was giving the horse away. And, brought in some experts and, looked at the academic research and have done these business cases. And no, I mean, when you negotiate, you have to be clear about what your priorities are, what matters to me, because it's not obvious and the other folks may have different complementary priorities. So I think that is one of the things, is just the understanding that we can go out and just say what we care about. In PEO Digital, for this fiscal year 25, we did a very formal, objective-driven planning process for the fiscal year. And we came up with 6 PEO objectives, and then we decomposed them one level to the next tier of management units, and we ended up with about 45, and they're on our website. And if you want to go, right next to the pilot intake form where you can apply for pilot funding is a list of objectives and our measures of how we're going to evaluate them. Just skip a few meetings, don't cold call us, it's right there. Go ahead and propose something.
So better communication with industry. And I'm glad you mentioned that the Navy has this focus on training leaders on this. We've heard from industry that one of their frustrations is that government contracting people don't always understand their constraints. It's no big deal for a government contracting person if they give a contract award to a small business on April 2nd versus March 30th. But for a small business, those quarterly reporting requirements to investors are a big deal.
Sure.
So getting that knowledge into your labor force is super useful.
I would just add, 2 points. I mean, just building on what Louis said, I think, what's part of the special sauce of organizations like DIU that can really help drive that innovation across the department, have the training that Louis said, but also folks who have spent time in both, right? We have a lot of dual fluency talent, folks like myself, right? I spent my 20s in uniform and then spent the next decade and a half in the private sector, really understanding and honing that, that perspective. And then you can bring them both together. And there's lots of people, and I think that the good news is that there's more and more folks who have spent time in both that want to continue to be part of that. But if I take one step back to your other question, DIU turns 10 years old this year, and the reason that Secretary Carter started again, I think, is because of the broader trend, why this is so important and why we need to have this communication with industry, and in particular the commercial technology sector, is because so much of the investment, the innovation, all of that is happening there. It's not happening in the DoD or funded by the DoD. Yeah. And if we don't continue to harness that and bring that in far more quickly and then scale it, the U.S. is not going to maintain the competitive edge which we need. And so fundamentally, I think that's why all of this matters. And you see, 10 years ago when we started, we were just starting to have those conversations again. We're in a completely different place now, and the private sector really understands that as well. And we just need to continue to bring that in.
We can't afford not to, right? So timelines of tech life cycle went from years, 10 years in some cases, to a year and a half. It takes a year and a half to buy something, then you're losing. You never catch up to that. From an urgency perspective, we're all marching towards the Davidson window and those type of urgency type activities. And we've been doing it long enough that we can get better at it. And so for all of those reasons, signaling, because the money could dry up if we aren't better at converting, needs to happen at the PEO's levels.
Well, I again, over time, back in the day, I noticed a push towards federated systems to integrate data and other capabilities better. Now I'm seeing more of a push to distributed systems and the modular open systems approach to be able to plug in new technologies at a faster refresh rate. So there is a question that we've gotten from the audience that I think I'd like to raise because of something you just said, Justin. James Angelis with the International Defense Industry Council of Japan asks that, or observes that over the years, DoD has created a number of different funding programs and outreach programs for non-traditional defense companies with emerging technologies. We have DARPA, DIU, CIBR program, OSC. How do you understand the return on investment for the taxpayer?
Yep. So InQtel is one that we work with a lot. So is DIU. Both of them are exemplary. In InQtel's case, they publish that for every dollar that the government invests, they get $25 of external capital. That's a ratio that is beneficial to our taxpayer, and it allows us to accelerate what we want to be in there in the first place. And so the way that we're measuring what's good, how do we move from Horizon 3, just evaluating, into Horizon 2, aggressively piloting something disruptive at a PEO, to Horizon 1, scaled production. We went from 2 ships to 14 ships to in the multiple dozens for comms technologies in a very short order. How do we do that? How do we turn that funnel on? We're measuring that based on outcomes. So we can say, hey, here is the increased bandwidth that we're getting, but if we translate that into what is the additional usage, what is the additional operational resilience of that platform, what are the ways that we are saving people time and allowing them to focus on their mission instead of waiting 7 seconds for data calls or longer, that's how we're making these evaluations. Yeah. And so what it does is it ends up putting apples against oranges. Do we need this technology or this technology? Well, you would never compare them, but they are making the same effect and it's the same dollar. And so we are trying to get the most effects per dollar every step of the way.
Do you want to talk about the investment horizons approach?
Yeah, so what we figured out, and to Liz's point, I personally have been at DARPA, I've been on the R&E side, I've also spent a lot of time in PEOs, and in between those sometimes lives that valley of death that people talk about. We want to bridge that, we want to shrink that in any way possible. And so what we've done is we've stolen somebody else's idea, we're leveraging an existing, we didn't invent this. I'm looking at Louis, but the actual horizons behind us. These are a big part of Agile. A consulting firm came up with this a long time ago. We worked with Stanford on it. Point is, everyone who's working in this community has to live in all three horizons in once, whether they acknowledge it or not. So if you're in a program executive office or a program management office, Horizon 1 will steal 110% of every day of your life if you let it. And so if you focus on today, tomorrow in a good way never comes. And so we are saying, hey, what percentage of your budget, of your time and attention are you focused on Horizon 2? And what signaling are you doing to external troops so that they are bringing Horizon 3 to you faster? And so all of that is our kind of like conjoining funnel so that we can live in multiple horizons and bring the future faster. And one of the keys to that is the one that we added, Horizon 0. Let's turn stuff off if it's not serving us anymore. So between tech debt and structured divestments, one of the fastest way to accelerate something, OSC is awesome and DIU is awesome, but we have to lower our bills so that their jumpstart funds can be sustained in a meaningful way.
Good,
Yeah.
good. I love this Horizons approach because it's not that, I mean, having this chart and having these ideas in our heads aren't new. Leaders have always had to balance the near term with the long term. I think having this formal framework allows leaders to really think about what they're doing so that they can make sure to continue thinking about the future and not really just get trapped in the day-to-day Horizon 1 tasks or Horizon.
Yes,
Yeah.
Horizon 1.
Yeah. that's
Horizon
right.
1, okay.
Yes.
Liz or Lewis, you want to pile on here?
Yeah, I mean, so the framework helps a lot in taking things that everyone intuitively knows and then making them explicit so we can actually have productive conversations around them, optimize around them. And the horizons, they're not static, they are fluid. We're always in motion back and forth across them. There are an infinite number of great ideas, and vendors are always coming up and saying, you know, I've got the best thing since sliced bread. Like, that does sound great. Also, I've got, you know, another 40 things that sound great. And what I really need is one of those that can shove something out of Horizon 1 into Horizon 0. Because for all the money we spend on digital capabilities and new technologies, there's never enough to buy all the new stuff and sustain the old stuff. So we always have to have that life cycle perspective and say, how is this pilot, if proven out in Horizon 2, going to actually shove something from Horizon 1 to Horizon 0? It's what the Department of the Navy calls cattle drive, because at the end of the cattle drive, you know, what happens to the cattle? There's always a reason to keep it, because it's hard. You know, no one wants to spend money on a hammer that's working.
Yeah.
But, you know, at some point you have to say, I know it only runs on Windows XP, but we're at Windows 11, and I'm sorry, thank you for your time, and let's move on. So that dynamic perspective, that explicitly dynamic perspective is really critical to getting more out of our investment.
I would just add, I mean, going back to the great question we got, I mean, ultimately the metrics that we're thinking about are we changing the way the warfighter fights and making them more lethal, more effective, you know, the more sustainable, further able to project? And are we changing the ConOps, right? Like, ultimately, that's what we're thinking about. I also spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, how are we broadly thinking about the broader health of the defense industrial base, and in particular commercial technology, manufacturing, a lot of those things, because if that's not there, it won't power it. You know, sort of like tied to the horizons, DIU historically is focused and will continue to do on prototyping, right? That sort of like initial horizon. But as we think about what we're prototyping, we're asking the question, okay, if this is successful, do we already have colleagues, you know, in the PEO who's going to be able to catch this on the other end 2 years later? Are they thinking about that? And one thing that we're really grateful for, if I sort of think of like the middle horizon in between the prototyping and 2 years later when it's been palmed for. So, you know, Congress in the last year gave us Agile funding, so we're able to also help with that initial fielding, initial production to then fully sort of like move it over. So I think those are some other examples of how we're working with, partners on the Hill and other places to really help to address and have a little bit clearer of an approach as we go from horizon to horizon.
I'm glad you raised the Agile funding issue because it's important for us all in the audience to remember and recognize that acquisition is just a part of the capability delivery ecosystem. And you can be as agile as possible, but if there's no funds to move that to the next steps, to procure, to acquire, it's just a frustration. So
There's been so much talking past, and then we know that all of the acquisition reforms, but at this point it's execution. And so if we're using the same language and not talking past each other, then we can pull those things forward. And so what Liz is talking about is we are planning transitions earlier than we have before. And we have vendors coming to us now and product partners that say, hey, we can divest all of this. Oh, then we can bring you forward, and we only need to worry about 2 years or one fundraise before you can get something into sustainment, right? As opposed to, a bunch of incremental yups and then never able to pull them over, or like a 50% hit rate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna bring up a question from the audience now, and this is from Styles Hurt with the U.S. Navy Fourth Fleet, and also a former CSIS Navy fellow. So thank you for the question, Styles. Styles observes that some experts assess that the Navy that we have today is the Navy that we're going to have in 2027, the notional Davidson window. So how do we convince DoD to adopt commercially owned and commercially operated solutions to fill capability gaps? There's always the challenge of requirements creep, where all the services plan to buy a commercially available capability, but then when it hits the requirements process, it's made unique for the services. How do you control that?
Yeah, well, I think first I would say that CNO agrees. Her NAV Plan 2024 is very much about what can we do inside the POM window to continue the things that are already working well, and to accelerate them and to place our bets and our resources where they can do the most good in the next 2+ years. And she's got the clock in her office counting down the days until we get there. I think the most important thing we can do is to understand the risk perspective of those decision makers.
Yeah.
And so the Horizons approach, agile approaches to budgeting, to contracting, to prototyping and piloting, we don't want to ask someone who thinks about Horizon 1 at scale globally to accept risk on something new at scale globally. We want to bring them not a PowerPoint, we want to bring them a production prototype. We want to bring in those red teams, whether actual, no kidding red teams or metaphorical red teams, to come in and throw rocks and show, actually I was a doubter, but I've looked at it, I've tried to break it, I couldn't, I see the benefit. So that data-driven approach, whether that's a contractor-owned, contractor-operated, government-owned and government-operated, or anything in between, as long as there is empirical data on the ground in a meaningful scenario, I think that's how you get buy-in.
I would just add, obviously, should be careful jumping in before Justin. I should defer to my Navy colleagues, especially when my heart really bleeds green. No, but even though, I would just sort of say as well, we're doing tremendous work in partnership with the Navy to prototype. When I just think of some of the really exciting efforts we have going on, from shipboard counter UAS to to USVs to LDUUVs, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot that I think that we're doing, again, like in very close partnership with the Navy, to bring in different commercial technologies that are going to be able to operate alongside everything else that already exists. So that's just one anecdote I would add for sure.
Yep. There's more money. There are more partners. We are doing it right now. There was an instance where we were on an existing network, and then we said, hey, zero trust is more important than it's ever been before. They put a 2027, same as Davidson window, deadline on that. The Navy just finished 3 years early because we leaned on commercial, and not just one company, but we pulled pilots. We had DIU's help. We put that together, and we ushered something from Horizon 3 into Horizon 1 3 years early in the government. So it's happening. The question is, like, how do we do more of it? And so there are integration challenges, but really we have this community of innovators, and we need to grow that community. We need hands up. We need people who are willing to play to win and lean forward, and then I think people are convinced.
Well, one of the tools or approaches that I've heard about over the years has been called spiral development, iterative development. You know, there's a number of terms for this idea that you take a capability that's maybe at the 80% level, you take it early, you take it where it's less expensive, and then you iterate over time to bring the capability up to, you know, meet the full requirement. Is this approach, is the iterative development approach a tool that you use here?
No, absolutely. First, I'll say that it's easier said than done sometimes to ask people to accept the 80% solution. And for folks who have been around software engineering and Agile, there are many cartoons about what an 80% complete bike or car looks like, not necessarily healthy. When we did, coming off COVID, pivot away from the DoD CVR solution into what became flank speed, that was the mindset. It was commercial technology, and we said, we can get there. It's going to be an 80% solution. It may be a bit bumpy in some areas. And everyone said, oh, of course, we'll take the 80% solution. And we turned it on. They said, hey, this doesn't work. That doesn't work. I said, well, that's in the 20%. So I think what's important is that maybe we don't talk about 80% solutions, but we talk about what is that continuum of capability? How does the capability evolve?
Okay.
And which capabilities do we prioritize first? Which are we going to deliver first? And so everyone goes in with eyes wide open. So, yep, you're going to get your email. You're not necessarily going to get access to this particular application. And that's just one example. But delivering those early slices of value, meaningful value that you can actually use and say, yeah, this is better than it was yesterday, is really critical, whether you call it Agile or DevOps or Spiral or incremental.
I would just add, I mean, I think the approach for how DIU brings in prototypes is absolutely embraces the iterative approach. I would probably, you know, steer away from the word 80, the term 80%, because I think that just creates lots of anxiety and probably is a misnomer and confuses folks. But from an iterative perspective, right, when we launch a CSO, we're asking, you know, we're putting out a broad problem statement and looking for responses back from the commercial industry, right? We're not asking for specific requirements, all of that. But then the way that we do the prototyping over 18 to 24 months has milestones built in so that it's iterative and things can evolve as they go, and you're working very closely with the mission partner as part of that. So it's a different approach to capability development, but is often what is required in this new generation of commercial technology that we're bringing in.
And related, 80% of what? So if it's 80% of a 400-page requirements document, then like there's probably 20% in there that's less important than the rest. And so what we're working with Optav End-to-End 6 to prioritize requirements and do top-level requirements, which opens the door for the answer is vendors and partners who can crush the most important things compared to the baseline. That is a favorable performance. So if you are really good at the top two things and we can iterate on the bottom two things to make sure that they're compliant with something, that is invaluably seen or perceived compared to, hey, we have 80% of a long checklist that's never been prioritized. That's a waste of everyone's time.
Yeah, so really focus on getting those key capabilities to the force.
I want to also maybe tie it back to what you were asking about Agile budgeting. So when we budget for capability, that builds in the ability to be incremental and to spiral. When we budget for technical specifications, particular solutions, then we box ourselves in. So we do have more maneuverability in the budget if we're smart about how we're couching what we're describing. If we're budgeting for warfighter capability, great. If we're budgeting for instance, I remember a business system, it came out with 5,147 requirements. And then they realized they missed one, so it was bumped to 5,148. You know, at that level, if the budget is to that, it gets very hard to be maneuverable.
Well, I know that budgeting flexibility is something that the department has advocated for with Congress for, decades. And hopefully the PPBE reform efforts underway will allow for some of that. I'd like to pick up on something that we talked about when we prepared for this panel. And subsequent to that, occurred to me that I am actually a sociologist. And one of the things that sociologists study is culture. Culture can be seen in how language is used. One of the things that we talked about in preparing for the panel was that the department really needs a common language across the services and across the innovation organizations to understand innovation, capability development, and to highlight outcomes versus, the 5,000 requirements. So how do terms of art in one branch or organization, how may they differ from others? What negative outcomes would this have? And how are you seeing this challenge and working to evolve it? So put on your sociology hats for me.
Well, a pro-con of mostly pro of the Department of Defense is it's so large, right? And so there are a lot of different use cases, but they may be related. There was a scenario just a year ago where we were doing something on a ship, and because of relationships, we realized the Army had a similar problem, and they were going out with a request for proposal. And we said, we think we've solved this. Can we just paint this brown and give it to you? And the answer was yes. And so we had something in Horizon 1 that they wanted to put into Horizon 2, and because of transparency, they could just leverage that. There was another scenario earlier this year where we're doing something enterprise, and the afloat guys said, we like that. And we said, well, can you use it? And they said, let's find out. And so we put it on a ship, and then we put it on 3 others. And so in both of these cases, a transparent Horizon 2 allowed for Horizon 1 action much faster than if we were just relying on acquisition.
I would just, it could be like your case study as you're a sociologist, because I came in, like I said, nine months ago from from industry. I mean, having grown up in the Army, but I can fully appreciate what you're talking about. I would just add one other key stakeholder that I think requires that shared communication as well, which is industry. So in addition to helping to make sure that all of the different groups within the Department of Defense and the intelligence community, all of the different elements within the national security are able to communicate with each other, but also increasingly, industry and commercial technology in particular, and how are we all understanding the different languages and, more importantly as well, the different incentives.
Yeah.
One perhaps bright spot that I think is helping to address this, I think it's what are the right forums and bodies and ways to uncover what Justin's talking about, the fact that the Navy has something the Army needs. Some other examples I think this past year that we have seen that enable those conversations to happen in a way they weren't before and to happen in parallel as opposed to in sequence are, the Defense Innovation Working Group and Steering Group that have been set up, this past year to help drive Replicator. And Replicator is really more of a process, right, than anything else. And and it's really around how do we find these critical joint strategic challenges that we have and work on them in a different way. So I think we are seeing early progress. I mean, there's tremendous amount more we can do, but I would point to that as one example of a bright spot.
They're putting their money where their mouth is there. Just this year, we went to DIU and we said, we have a problem. And they said, find someone else with the problem. And so then we searched around. We got another service and agency involved. And then we put a mobility solution in Guam early. And then it ended up they really needed it and then other people needed it. And so we were just early to need. This is a reactive system that we have proactive methods of doing. And those are just from a return on investment perspective, way more impactful in the scaling game than they used to be.
Yeah, I mean that ability. They say you can't really scale Agile up; you can only scale problems down. So having that lean startup mindset, having lots of affordable bets that won't take too long, won't cost too much, and then the ones that really take off are great. From a language perspective, a lexicon, we really made good use of the technology business management framework, which is actually mandated by OMB to a certain degree. There are like 4 layers, and they require 2 layers, and there are different versions. But it's been very helpful to us because there are a lot of people who are buying computer stuff, and they all describe it slightly differently. Even within PEO Digital, we were describing things differently, and you couldn't really trace between the budget lines and the program management descriptions and the contracts and the schedules. They're all using different words, and it's hard to check your spelling when you can't agree on what the alphabet is.
Yeah.
So like, okay, this isn't the sexiest thing out there, but it is important that we all use the same words to describe the same capabilities. Ends, ways, means are all different. They relate, but we can't conflate them, and that's been very helpful in seeing clearly.
It lowers friction, including for our public-private partnership. So when OSC is coming out with funding for things, we can transmit to them, here are our needs, and then here's how they align to Army. Can you take this? And so those type of trades with the Air Force in the, the 8X amount of loans that they're going to be able to write, and the one that's coming out in March, those are all things that allow us to get better buying power right now. That's just a win-win.
So there's a couple of questions that have come in online on working with allies and partners. So is, in terms of both how you communicate with them to work together to define joint requirements and how you might lead that to joint acquisition, co-production, how are you working with allies and partners on these issues? The National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, all these strategic documents highlight the importance of that. Please share how you're thinking about this.
Yeah, I'm happy to start on that one. Global partnerships, as we talk about it, has been a critical effort and critical pillar of what we've been doing in DIU, especially as we have seen, whether it's in the UK, Australia, Japan, India, Singapore, continued have their own version of a DIU as part of them as well. So working very closely, that those are just like a sampling of the type of countries we're working to put embeds. We now have an embed in the UK version of DIU and are working to do that elsewhere. We started launching challenges, so we have joint challenges that we're doing. We have a number of them live as we speak, and more continuing. Whether it's with, we just launched one in December in Japan that was focused on biosurveillance and AI. One in India, others. So challenges are one way that we're really starting to do that, and then we're looking to think even more deeply beyond challenges. How are we going to move into co-production and those sorts of things? As you can imagine, I mean, all of these are very complicated and take a lot of time, but where can we cut down those barriers and streamline and move even more quickly? So we're excited about those, and that's another one that we plan to do even more of going forward.
Yeah. In the technology space, obviously, the international cooperation adds another layer of complexity to the problem space. I think approaches like Zero Trust actually help us work through that. What are all the considerations? What are we thinking about in terms of what devices do they want or are they using? What are the networks they transport over? What are the identity control regimes? Yeah. And while we've seen a lot of technology innovation in the unclassified space, we are seeing it now gain more traction, more speed and secret and higher than secret classifications, where some of those cooperation environments are very compelling. So I think there is an acceleration there, and I think Zero Trust is helping us get there.
And then shrinking the time from idea to impact allows more American companies to be available and diligenced for allied partners, as well as it allows more companies and ideas in the left half of the funnel there in Horizon 3, which supports challenge economics, which supports in general more learning by doing. We want to learn from other people's activities, not just our own. It's faster. And so we learned a lot from Ukraine in terms of how we think about critical technologies. It refined the way that we signal, and it refined the way that here's how fast we can actually go. We remember that now.
Okay, let's pick up on that last point. Russia's illegal war in Ukraine has dragged on for almost 3 years, which is a lot longer than the planning horizons of the department or not now, but certainly in the past. Wars aren't going to be over super quick. So how is this? How are you planning for this, what are the key lessons you're getting from Ukraine in terms of supply chain, production capacity, scalability challenges, and the urgency of addressing them? How are you incorporating those lessons into your missions?
I mean, I think, Ukraine, there has just, you can't talk enough about the lessons learned that we're continuing to learn. We have regular meetings and visits both in Ukraine and thereabouts. We have an embed in UCOM, et cetera. I mean, some of the big lessons that we continue to learn, from recent visits and experience. I mean, number one is just the continued use of, how important it is to pull commercial technology in. The second is the speed and cycle times. I mean, in Ukraine, it's software software updates are happening every few weeks, as opposed to, right? So it's like just a next level of speed and cycle time. And then the third one really, I think, has to do with like the EW environment that is going on there. So I think just continuing to keep all of those lessons learned at the forefront while we continue to support, as well through prototypes that we're doing and other things, especially in the UAS and counter UAS experiences.
It emphasized the importance of manufacturing, and technology is helping when we let it disrupt in a positive way how quickly we can manufacture. And so you have the OODA loop on the battlefield, and then you have the loop of here's how long it takes to make something from dark start. And that is something that we are now not just looking at, but our Catapult initiative within Department of Navy is looking at prioritizing and accelerating, and this will be coming out in the next week or so. Here are the next 5 companies and organizations who can help us accelerate our biggest challenges. And so what it has done is it has validated the Mavericks who said, we need to go faster. No kidding, the OODA loop is cut drastically down. What are we doing about it? And so between the manufacturing, between the removing of bottlenecks, between all of these things that allow us to focus on here is the biggest impact, we have the proof points on somebody else's turf.
Yeah. If I could just add one more thing, I mean, going back to the speed and the cycle time, I mean, I think Ukraine shows the urgency with which one operates when they are at war, right? I mean, I'm reflecting on when I was, a captain in Iraq, right? Like, for those
When
of
we
us
were
that,
at war.
right, when we were at war, and the urgency and the cycle times and the transformation that happened when you had to. And I think what we're all collectively trying to do is how are we bringing that same urgency to the problems that we have in the U.S. and bringing that urgency to what we're doing on a day in and day out basis to continue to transform the U.S. military.
And
so that's a powerful just reminder, I think, from Ukraine that we want to do now in the U.S. so that we're not, in the same situation.
It's resulted in us, like large and small things. So we're in the process right now of putting more 3D printers on ships because we can. Like that was something that was kind of caught between Horizon 2 and Horizon 1. And so it's forging forward. There are a number of things that have been just waiting on a push. And we think that pull is increasingly here. And then we tell an impact story that says, hey, here's what you can stop doing. This is a no-brainer. The risk, if you localize that risk at an individual, maybe it's more risk for that individual. But operationally, this is a lower risk activity. So we have to think about this in terms of the warfighter at all times.
Yeah. I think the cultural impact has been huge, as we're saying, that people had this real scarcity mindset, like, we can't do it. Whatever the thing is, 3D printers, we've been trying for 10 years. What's it going to take to get additive manufacturing at sea? So this has really helped us move to more of an abundance mindset that, yes, we can demand more. Yes, we can expect more. Yes, we can actually deliver results. And, what's nice is the understanding I see within Navy and Marine Corps leadership that you can't really berate someone into being innovative. It's more of that gardening mindset. You can't, yell at your tomatoes to grow and your weeds to stop growing. You can cultivate, you can set the conditions up, but ultimately, you can just foster the environment. You can't make those decomposed problems get to better results with those lean agile teams.
So I get the goal of having a robust defense innovation ecosystem. And certainly, I'm glad to hear that the lessons from Ukraine have pushed things like additive manufacturing along. Because certainly, 10 years ago, the use case was clear. So I'm glad to hear that it's being used more. But again, it's what has taken so long for this. So given that the lesson from Ukraine is the importance of this innovation ecosystem, and certainly DIU has been focused on this for a decade, as you point out, what are the process challenges? What are the gaps? What would you like to see the new administration address to facilitate and strengthen this ecosystem?
Liz mentioned earlier that we'd like to change the ConOps with technology. Tech-informed concept of employment is really important. So if we do waterfall, here's how it should be, and then here's the technology, and then here's the vendors who can provide that technology, not only is that slow, but it doesn't take advantage of anything that happens while that process is going on. And so where we can use tech, and so Task Force 5.9 on autonomy learned by doing, and then we were able to apply that and then start to move some of those autonomy lessons learned, and that fed Replicator, and it fed a number of things. And so what we're doing right now is just like we did with investment horizons as one of the accelerating change design concepts, we're doing that. We'll release this very soon, adaptive roadmaps that says, hey, if we have learned something that allows us to be more lethal or more resilient, let's pull that forward. Let's figure out how to make that happen as opposed to just doing the waterfall. So if a user is working with a capability that DIU has helped us procure or that we've gotten some other way, and they have ideas on the battlefield, that shouldn't necessarily take 18 months to cycle back. They have it now.
So we've had the adaptive acquisition framework for 6 years. Are you still using the waterfall, or are you using one of the other pathways to procure your capabilities?
So on the acquisition side, we're using, you should talk about that, but on the acquisition side, we're using a number of these different things, but kind of the rest of it, the .mlpf piece of it is tricky. So we can say, hey, we can do this, but then it'll take a year to document it and then another year to train it. What are ways where we're getting intuitive tools from our commercial partners that we can compress that or change that drastically?
Yeah, I would say that, certainly we need that continued encouragement and support from OSD and from Congress on middle tier of acquisition, software acquisition pathway, the contracting and non-FAR authorities like OTA and 4023 for procurement for experimental purposes. But the PPE Reform Commission piece of it is a critical enabler. And even if we're doing the best we can, having those things in place so that we're able to put the money where it needs to go to show that content-driven employment concept development in lieu of or as a supplement to traditional requirements development, one POM cycle ahead of the POM cycle that'll kick it. So we really need all those things and have the adaptive budget structure as well as the adaptive acquisition structure.
Liz, what are your thoughts on this?
I think most fundamentally, you talked a lot about risk. I think we have to reframe and understand that the biggest risk is that we don't get the capabilities in the hand of the warfighter, with the speed and the scale to be ready to go. And we have to change the incentive structures and how we think about risk in order to manage to that, as opposed to lots of other things that people are managing towards. The other two things I would say is, in all cases ask, why can't we go faster? And this is everything from, recently someone's like, I have someone new that's starting in February I'm super excited about, and they're like, well, this person's going to start February 10th. And I was like, I thought they were going to start February 3rd. It's off cycle, but then they can do it that way. But it's like literally every step of the process questioning, why can't we do this faster? Why can't we do it differently? And often we can. It's just the system is used to doing it a certain way. And I think we just need people to come in with that different mentality. The last thing I would say, going back to sort of agile budget and processes and those sorts of things, I also think it's a give-get, right? So when we got the more agile funding, the get was we are super transparent back with Congress. And, on a very regular basis, we're sharing with them exactly how we're spending that agile funding line and giving them 2 weeks notice before we do things. And so how and where can we also increase our transparency to build the trust that will enable us to be able to go even faster. So I think that's just an important give-get too.
Yeah.
Yes.
That extending that operations, that transparent operations to outcomes. If we are transparent, we say, hey, we worked with these 3 companies, we are scaling 2 of them, their capability is 5xing our capability on the floor, and we were able to divest that in 6 months thereafter. The return on investment there is quantitative. Like, we can show that business case and say, who doesn't like this? The people who are divested, but they get a chance to reinvent themselves. So that is a win-win.
Yeah, so the cost risk of making investments is clear. You know, if something fails, you spent $100 million on, or whatever, on something that failed. It's the risk of not doing something for the warfighter that's a lot harder to measure. And, you know, until we really are able to shine a light on that and increase the focus on that, it's the right things are not being focused on.
Agree.
Yeah.
So,
The risk of inaction is like a silent killer.
yeah.
And so where we have people who are playing to win, we've measured this, they are 7 times more effective, the teams that are playing to win, as opposed to the ones who are playing not to lose. And so to Liz's point, where you have lean-in folks who are either here or they're watching right now and they want to like contribute or they want to come in, that makes all the difference in the world, a bigger difference than they realize before they join.
I think, that cultural shift is really dependent on things like two-way doors, on-ramps, off-ramps. So that's where Agile really helps in the decision making. If we can say you're not signing off on a 30-year shipbuilding plan, you're signing off on a 3-month, $1 million transparent experiment. That piloting mindset is what helps us see you can not be scared of making the wrong decision because the consequences of that wrong choice are small and fast and cheap.
Right.
How to get your workforce to focus on this? You mentioned that sort of lean-in mindset. You know, are there people...
All-day meetings, all day, every day.
I mean, do you have people who are willing to do that, or are people risk averse? You know, the number of contracting officers who raise the specter of the fact that they're the ones in the program office that can go to jail, you know? I mean, how do you get this embracing of risk and innovation?
So leading from the front, saying, I own this decision, I'm going to take the risk, you own your decisions, you take your risks. Being brave in terms of those, how do we always do things, timelines, personnel choices, picking the best people, unconventional arrangements with actings to make sure you have the right person in the right place at the right time to drive things forward. And so, culture is people, and you have to foster those people, get the right people in the right place.
And from a sociology perspective,
Right.
we know that some people have a natural proclivity toward this, right? And so we have Mavericks. At least 10% of our organization is Mavericks. Captain Kevin White on CVN 72 said, let's pilot some things, let's make things happen. I will own the responsibility. He was an accountable person, and he brought huge outcomes. And that was kind of innovation after innovation. And so Sailor Afloat and Ashore, SEA2, and Catnip are there because of his leadership and what he was making. We have those people all over the place. Marine Innovation Unit's really good at standing up and making something happen and then handing it off to the folks who are supposed to maintain that. So that exists. It's really a matter of, do we remove friction for those folks, and can we find them quickly enough and connect them to a tribe? We're trying to do that as much as possible. We can grow that to 20, 30, 40%.
Are you able to find innovators when you reach out to the services looking for customers for the capabilities that you see?
I mean, I think there are certainly organizations that are leaning further than others, a lot of it having to do with the leaders. But yes, they absolutely exist. And I think the heartening news as well is the number are growing. As the case studies continue to show, as the wins start to increase, we have more and more of those organizations coming and saying, we want to work with you.
Okay, well, I think that's good news that you're growing this innovation mindset across the department.
Winning is a compounding game,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And so it's contagious. And so like when Captain White said, hey, who at PEO Digital can I work with? Damon Regan stepped up. And then it is dominoes. It's just a matter of, can we fuel that flywheel faster?
Yeah, and making sure people understand that the benefits of taking risks outweigh the potential challenges.
Winning's not
Absolutely.
a zero-sum game. and no one should feel threatened by other people winning. They should get in on that success.
Yeah. All right, well, this conversation has really flown by, which I think is because you're such interesting guests. So thank you. Any final closing remarks you'd like to share? Anything you're working on going forward that we should be looking out for?
Well, we're going to be at FCA Don IT West in a little bit, 2 weeks? So looking forward to meeting with our industry partners and our government partners, and we'll have trade show floors, and we'll have industry open houses, and looking forward to a lot of engagement there.
Fun.
And so one of the themes there, the main theme there is information superiority vision 2.0. We want to make that vision even more of a reality. And so we're doing that with optimized pilots and a number of other pilots. And so one of these mechanisms, Catapult, is just about to announce their top 5 winners and how we make use of this funnel to pull new players, non-traditionals, traditionals alike. It's just all based on outcomes from 3 to 2 to 1, and everyone should be looking at opportunities to divest.
Okay, and Liz?
No, just really excited about the momentum that we're continuing to build and all that we're going to be able to do this year. So looking forward to seeing, many of you online and other places throughout different events in 2025.
Okay, well, Liz Young McNally, Louis Koplin, and Justin Fanelli, a round of applause for you, and thank you for coming to CSIS today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.